Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes, get have some people pour in, and I'll get the presentation up and running. We'll get started here in about a minute or two. While I do that, I'd love to get the chat going. The chat is open. We really want to make this very conversational, very casual. Stuffy is not what we want here. But let us know who you are, where you're from, who you're with. We'd love to get the chat going. And Kelly and Sarah, we can see the presentation, right?
Yes. Yes, sure can.
Perfect.
Fun to see some friends in the chat. Hi.
Yes. Oh, hi, Michelle from Portico. Good to see you again. I think you're in one or two other webinars that we've had. Anne, hi. Good to see you. Hi, Travis. All right. Well, let's get started. So, like I said, drop your name in the chat if you guys are just entering. We're going to go ahead and get started. And again, we want to just keep this really conversational, really casual. We're going to go through and talk about marketing your marketing, mastering internal alignment, how multifamily marketing leaders win the room while they win their market. And you're welcome to offer your insight in the chat, ask questions as we go through. We may be surfacing up some of those questions, but we hope that there will be plenty of time at the end of the hour to ask any additional questions. And so we may reserve some of those questions, or you can wait until that time, but you certainly don't have to. With that, let's go ahead and do some introductions, and then we'll kick it off really quickly. Good to see everyone here. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Autumn. I'm the Vice President of Revenue with Resi. Why I'm in this room, beyond just bringing this excellent panel together and really acting as moderator today, I spent about 7 years in the shoes that Sarah and Kelly are in or were once in. So I headed marketing and training for an owner operator, and marketing your marketing or internal marketing was such a significant part of my role, and really what makes us successful as marketers, and even specifically in multifamily marketing. Kelly, you want to take it from here, introduce yourself, and then hand it over to Sarah?
Sure. So I'm Kelly Ranieri, Associate Vice President of Marketing at Northland, where I lead marketing strategy across our nationwide multifamily portfolio. I focus primarily on brand, digital, and demand generation. And similar to what Autumn was just saying, I have learned that doing great marketing work is only part of the job. Making sure the rest of the organization understands the strategy and the why behind it and the value it brings is just as important. So I'm very excited to be discussing this topic today with you and Sarah. Sarah, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everybody. I'm Sara Graham. I am founder and CEO of Six Dots. I'm a fractional chief marketing officer. I only work in multifamily. Prior to going out on my own 2 years ago, I was in-house across 3 different management companies leading marketing and customer experience. So I know this topic all too well. And now, as a fractional, I often help some of my operator clients, some of whom work on the marketing side, actually tackle what we are about to talk through today. So, something I have been through myself multiple times and now get to advise other leaders, and often act as the connective tissue between marketing, tech, and operations. And so, we'll talk a little bit more about that and how some of those um, areas intersect, and how we really create alliances to help marketers market their marketing. So excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I am too. Um, let's talk a little bit about this. So, why are we here today? This kind of goes back to a conversation that we had actually in May. We held a private event at AIM in Huntington Beach. And if you haven't been to AIM, I very highly recommend it. It is one of the best conferences, especially for marketers in multifamily. Anyways, this event was called Off the Record. So it was an evening, like intimate conversational event. And it was a space to have conversations, the types of conversations that weren't really happening on the main stage. And one of the major themes that was discussed, and I major kudos to Kelly for talking a lot about this and bringing it forward to the group, was a key to a marketing leader's success is internal marketing, the marketing you're marketing, everything we'll be talking about today. We know, and we are a positively biased group of like how important marketing is and how it can really move mountains, but the puzzle pieces have to align. There has to be alignment across the entire organization. It's our job as marketing leaders to put that puzzle together and create that alignment. So like I said, Kelly and Sara, they really led this conversation for the group, and it stirred literally weeks and months, even now, and we'll continue having this conversation moving forward. And we're like, let's bring this to the broader group. And so today, like I said, I'll be moderating. We'll have our two marketing experts here, Kelly and Sara, like really, really take it from here and dig in. So, like I said, marketing can move mountains. We know the power of marketing, not only the power of marketing, but just how critical it is to every organization's success. When we got together and we were thinking about how to develop a framework for this conversation, we thought while there are many components to making this work, we want to concentrate on like the three focus areas. The first is like the education mandate, claiming time, really having education as a core part of that conversation, finding the right gatekeepers and identifying what type of gatekeepers there are in your corner or perhaps not in your corner, and then overcoming resistance to change and change management. So first, I want to kick off with a few questions. Take to the chat. Currently, if you had to estimate what percentage of your work time is dedicated to educating up and across the company? Like, I spend 10% or I spend 0%. That's totally possible too. These are like things that don't live in our job description. We just know as marketing leaders that we have to do them. So Travis says 60. That feels healthy. Kelly and I just hopping on, we were talking about how like some days it felt like some weeks it was like 75 or 90%. 40 to 50%. It's very healthy.
I appreciate Gunner's chat.
Yeah, that's good. This is, yeah, 10%. So we're getting some ranges.
Hmm.
Let's see. I went the wrong way. Okay, let's change the question. How much of marketing leaders' bandwidth should go to educating up and across the company, and why that number? What feels ideal for you in your role?
I'm so interested to see what people say to this
Hmm.
question. I think it's not one size fits all, is my spoiler.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
So people are saying less, actually. They're saying, I want to be
Wow.
spending less time. If you said less time, like Travis, I'm just going to pick on you, Liz. If you said less time, I'm really want to hear from you. Like, you're spending about like 50-ish plus percent, but you think it should be 10% if you want to take to the chat. Too
Hmm.
many fires to put out, not enough bandwidth. Hmm. Sarah, can you talk a little bit more, like as you grow in your career, some of the changes that one can expect and kind of just dig into this a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the reasons this number is so hugely variable, as we're seeing in the chat here, um, is because all of our companies are so different. I
Mhm.
was a one person show multiple times in my career, truly a team of one. And then over time was able to grow the team. But depending on how flat or matrix your organization might be, and depending on who you report to, often influences how much of your time is really spent in these conversations, and educating up and across the organization is so incredibly important. I myself have not reported to another marketer in more than 20 years. So I was reporting to, and that includes my time outside of the, being a fractional, I'm sort of excluding that, but being in house, I think the last time I reported to another marketer was 2004. So a very long time. And that meant I was reporting into the COO, I was reporting into a partner, I reported into the CEO, I reported to the president of the management company. Again, very different organizations, sometimes management changes. But what that meant was that my direct supervisor was not a marketer and sometimes didn't know a lot of the things that I was working on. And so that to me opened up the door for a lot of really meaningful conversations. And I reported to some brilliant people, who I learned a ton from about other parts of the business. But again, there's sort of an alignment opportunity to say, how are you spending your time and what do we really need to be doing from a strategic standpoint, from a resource allocation standpoint? And there's opportunity to not educate just up, but across. And I would say too, if you are a senior marketer and you have more junior marketers reporting to you, that's an opportunity too. Or if you are the more junior marketer and you're in a team environment, there's a responsibility on you too to make sure that everybody else knows what you're working on, including your CMO, your VP of marketing, whomever it is you may report to. Marketing is changing so fast, and there is always more room for all of us to be learning, always, something that I firmly, firmly believe. But I think a lot of what we're talking about today is really sort of if you are in the driver's seat of marketing and you're talking about building alliances with others across your organization, I think is where Kelly and I will spend most of our time today. But I think a lot of what we're talking about can be applied to lots of different seats on the marketing team. So I'll just sort of say that as a caveat and a framework maybe for what we're going to speak to and throughout the next 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, and Sarah and Kelly, feel free to like hit the ding and I'll push forward in the presentation. We're ready to go to the next slide.
I think so.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
absolutely.
I don't want to assume we're ready to push forward.
No, no, you're fine. I would say another aspect of this too is when educating or marketing is being able to tailor it. It's a really important part because you can't communicate marketing the same way to every audience. So the strategy itself may not change, but how you communicate it absolutely should. You have to understand what matters to each group and make the message relevant to them. So if we look at this slide, there's three audiences. So starting with the C-suite with senior leadership, I typically try to keep it at the business level. I really focus on answering what the challenge or the opportunity is that we're seeing. What's marketing recommending? What's the investment? And what impact do we expect it to have? They don't necessarily need all the tactical details at this level. They just need to understand the business case. And then you have your regional leaders. So you're bringing it closer to the portfolio or property level. Here I focus on answering, what are we seeing at their communities? Why do I believe this particular strategy is the right response? And where do I need their support to make it successful? And that third audience group of on-site staff, here I'm making it really practical. So I try to answer for them, what's changing? Why are we doing this? What, if anything, do we need them to do differently? And perhaps most importantly is how is this going to help them or their property? So it's the same strategy, but the relevance and the way I position it changes depending on who I'm communicating with. I think that's a key part of success.
Do you have any
Uh,
examples? I was just going to say, any examples, Kelly and Sarah, of this in real life and how this has gone well, or maybe a lesson that you learned over time?
I would love to give an example. I want to just say one thing that I know we had chatted about previously in our prep session, and I
Mhm.
neglected to say it out loud in this call. But a lot of what Kelly just spoke to, and again, one of the things that came up in our prep call is the stuff that we're talking about is not just reporting or education. It's really bringing, and you had it on the slide a minute ago, Autumn, but it's
Mhm.
really thinking about visibility and advocacy,
Mhm.
which is so important. And that really ties to, is thinking about these different ways that we can educate. It's a little like internal PR. I was in PR a million years ago, and so there's a part of me I think that carries that forward in almost every other role I've had, where we are trying to think about what's in it for our different stakeholders and how do we really cater the message or um, sort of form the message in the way that Kelly was mentioning, where you've got these different audiences. I think that really shows up in different ways, and you can sort of think about these two um, different approaches or frameworks almost overlapping each other or overlaying each other.
Mhm.
You've got visibility, advocacy, and alignment, and then you've got this idea of the different audiences on top of that and how they all sort of connect. And sometimes that feels like you are when you're doing this PR work, it can feel a little like you are tooting your own horn. But I actually think of that in a different way where you are actually advocating for resources and you are creating knowledge about the work that you and your team are doing so that you can go out and design education for each of these audiences and really create awareness and alliances. Um, when people have a better understanding of what you're doing and why, and again, that looks very different depending on the audiences that you're speaking to, that takes on a whole different shape. And suddenly you have advocates from other parts of the company saying, hey, marketing mentioned that they were working on this. This is going to make our on-site team so much easier, or this is going to really impact the way that we do strategic planning from a budget standpoint. Or, yes, we actually really do need this tech because of the fact that it's going to allow us to actually cut another piece out that's been underperforming or people haven't been fully adopting. So there's really a lot there that when you're thinking about how and where and why you do this work, if you're uncomfortable with it feeling like, oh, I don't like talking about myself, and it's reposition it in your brain, and it suddenly becomes a whole lot more empowering when you think about it for the growth of your team, the resources that you have access to, and the work you're actually able to accomplish together. So I just wanted to throw that in because I think it was maybe implied on the slide previously, and I know we're going to talk a lot more about this in the next few minutes, but wanted to just add a bit more context for some of the things that we will be talking about in a few minutes. So Kelly, I know you probably have really good examples about some of this too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you adding that extra context. And actually, I think that's a great segue to the second part of this slide about
Mhm.
context, relevancy, and consistency too. Because for me, I've learned that good internal education really comes down to those three things. So we need to give people enough context to understand the why and then make it relevant to what they actually care about and then communicate it consistently. Can't communicate something once and assume everyone is aligned, which leads me into a great example. Recently, our team rolled out a new dashboard with a longstanding vendor partner, and it was a significant change from what our site teams and stakeholders were used to on the previous dashboard. And pretty quickly, we started hearing a lot of frustration around the user experience and how to navigate it. So that feedback, that pushback that we were getting signaled to me that simply rolling out the platform with an initial communication wasn't enough. We needed more education and communication around it. So we worked with the vendor on additional training. We continued to communicate updates and enhancements back to our teams and created more opportunities for people to ask questions and share feedback. And that communication that we've been doing for this rollout of the dashboard has looked very different depending on the audience. So with our site teams, it's been much more practical. How can they actually use this new dashboard? Where should they go when they need help? But with our regional leaders, it's more about making sure they understand the changes within the dashboard and how it can best support them and their teams. And then certainly at the leadership level, that C-suite level, the conversation is more about whether the platform is ultimately delivering the value we expect from the investment. Are we getting the ROI we should be? And I can speak a little bit to the warning signs too before you move on
Yeah,
there,
yeah, let's do it.
because I think that that's a really important part of this too. So there are, clear warning signs for when maybe you haven't communicated enough or tailored your message enough for your audience. And that can certainly look like if the C-suite is constantly questioning ROI, wondering why marketing is investing so much into something. Or constant pushback or just general confusion could be another really great indicator as well. And sometimes we haven't given them maybe enough context or made the relevance clear. So that pushback can actually become this really great learning experience for that individual and for the marketing team as well. It can actually be this moment of collaboration and true partnership, which is something that Sara and I talk about all the time. So it can give you that platform to have a really collaborative moment with somebody when they do push back or when you start to see those warning signs start to pop up.
Yeah, I think questions are a great signal, and questions don't necessarily mean that something is wrong, but questions
Mm-hmm.
do give us the opportunity to provide context. And I think they're definitely an important signal to say we have more work to do from a communication
Right.
standpoint. So I think that's when you start getting questions from either lateral peers in the organization or you start getting questions from the C-suite, that's a great signal to sort of take a step back and think about where are there potentially areas for us to refine communication or loop back with our stakeholders, and whether that's the on-site teams or regionals or partners in technology or elsewhere in the organization, to really think about where might there be friction that hadn't popped up on our radar before, or just an area that needs to be clarified. But I'm a huge fan of feedback in all forms. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
again, what you do with that feedback and how you show up in response to it is a huge indicator, I think, of how we can continue to build those frameworks and really make sure that we are proactive, not reactive. That was something I've heard a lot. And I think probably many of us have, that marketing can sometimes fall into this reactive instead of proactive sort of mindset. And often I read earlier in the chat that someone just said they're putting out fires left and right. I, I think many of us can relate to that. So I think that's a really important opportunity, again, for us to just sort of take a step back, see where we're getting questions, and then be able to revisit so that we can be more proactive in how we're communicating and showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of questions and pushback as information. They tell you where you may have an education gap,
Yeah.
and that's really valuable for you to be aware of. And on the proactive and reactive note, absolutely can resonate with that, Sara. One thing I will say, like when I'm putting out a communication or trying to educate across or up the organization, I try to be proactive. Even when I'm putting out a million fires, I try to take a moment to pause and anticipate what pushback or questions I'm likely to get based on the audience I'm communicating with. So whether it's C-suite, regional managers, or my on-site staff, I try to take a moment to be proactive and address any concerns or potential education gaps that may come up ahead of time, just to hopefully mitigate any resistance or pushback that may come up.
One of the favorite things, I think, one thing that we're not talking about in all of these is something more like tactic based or like how we can leverage tools to help support some of this education. Michelle brings up a great point. Like the constant question about keywords clearly tells me we haven't educated well. And I know from my time, um, uh, uh, like educating up and across and down everywhere in the organization, at first everything lived in an email, right?
Mhm.
And people would come in and out of the organization. And so we really developed like our internal employee hub, which was really important so that people can look to a central source of information for education instead of things living in like aged trainings or aged emails that maybe they didn't open or read. And so, too, I think that that's part of this conversation or what people can think about is how the tools can supplement or actually improve their ability to educate in the organization. Let's
Yeah.
let's move on to so we talked a little bit about roles. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more. That's a key piece of the people who are in your corner or not, or the gatekeepers, who they are, how to identify them, and maybe the buckets that they apply to, and how you navigate those relationships differently. So, how do we figure out who we educate to, and then how much is needed for each of those? So the right gatekeepers, they control access to the success of your marketing in very different ways. I'm going to hand it over to Sara to really talk about like how to find the right gatekeepers, and why it matters.
Yeah, I think this is such a key conversation, and the graphic you just had on the screen,
Yep.
Autumn. I think uh, when I was in house, I probably had double the number
Mhm.
of icons or little chess pieces that were on here. Everyone from, CEO, C-suite, owners, certainly asset managers, property managers, operations. But I think if you work in a company where you're also doing development and lease ups, developer, the whole development company becomes a gatekeeper. And then you've got internal departments. And so I think why this matters is really critical because marketers truly are, I think, one of the most cross collaborative teams in
Mhm.
any company, but certainly in multifamily. When I was in house, I liked to say that I was sitting at the intersection of marketing technology and operations. And that's honestly what defined much of the trajectory of my career because I was constantly working across the organization on everything from lease ups to pitching third party business to technology implementation to leasing training, was physically on site a lot, working with on site teams. I still do that even now as a fractional and consultant. One of the first things I do when I'm working with an owner or operator is understand what's working for the on site teams. And I think really understanding um, the lay of the land is so important. And you can do this whether you are brand new in an organization or whether you have been there for a decade. But really understanding what's working, what isn't, and where things are getting blocked is a big piece of understanding marketing and its success. And so, one of my very favorite things to do, and again, you can do this on day one or day 1001, is do a listening tour. And what that really looks like is figuring out who some of the people that you and your team intersect with most frequently. Or even if you don't necessarily connect with or collaborate with teams or people frequently, but you know that somebody has influence in the organization and you are trying to think about how do you create alignment between what marketing is doing and what this other team or person is doing, is actually set up some time to go talk with them. And if you can do it in person, great. You can also easily do this via Zoom if you are a distributed team. But the point is to really understand, again, what's working, what isn't, what do they wish could happen from a marketing standpoint. If they could wave their magic wand and do anything or have marketing do anything, what would that be? Understanding that you are not the genie hopping out of a magic lamp and can grant that wish, but that feedback is really important. And what it will tell you if you do five, seven, maybe even a dozen of these, and it doesn't have to be all at once, but I do suggest doing it within the span of no more than 60 days for the sake of having some consolidated feedback, is you'll start to see trends and patterns. And you will, if you are leading a marketing team, you should ask your own team these questions too to say, where are we getting pushback? What's going well? Where are you getting a lot of feedback or questions? And you can collate all of that. And again, the trends and patterns will reveal themselves. That allows you to then document friction, opportunities, and allies. And I will tell you, this is the foundation or can serve as the foundation for any strategic initiatives that you need to either stand up that are new. You may be seeing things in these conversations that you had no idea existed, that were a huge issue and a huge opportunity. Or you may say, well, this is an opportunity to refine. So the listening tour to me is something that has been just a gold mine of information. And again, if you work on the operator side, strongly encourage you to include some on-site teams in this. You will learn more than you ever dreamed possible. I can see Kelly smiling.
I am. I'm a big fan of listening tours. I certainly did that when I first joined Northland, and I received so much value from it. Just like you said, Sarah, like understanding the opportunities, understanding what was working, what wasn't. It helped me build this roadmap for the next, 1, 2, 3 years from the time I had that listening tour. And I think the other advantage of a listening tour as well is that you start to understand the value proposition for each department, for each stakeholder that you're likely going to be working with. And that's really valuable too. You start to hear from them, what do they care about? What's important to them? What do they consider a priority versus another department or their site team, or your regional? So it can just give you this much deeper level of understanding of your organization across the board. And with that, that's perfect to talk about the right gatekeepers. So one way that I found it really helpful to think about gatekeepers is that not every stakeholder plays the same role. So I tend to think about them in three buckets, which is approval, influence, and adoption. So this first bucket of approval, those are the people who ultimately will determine whether I can move forward with something. So depending on what I'm proposing, that might be my SVP, or it could be another VP who oversees part of the portfolio, or sometimes it could even be our CEO. But they often care about the business case, the cost, the risk, expected impact, why now, how we plan to measure success. I need them to believe that there's a sound business case for what I'm recommending. And then the next bucket, influence, for me, that's often our regional leaders or a department like asset management that we work frequently with. They may not technically be the person giving me the final approval, but if they don't believe in what we're doing, it's going to be very difficult for it to gain traction. And then that last bucket of adoption, that's often our community managers and site teams. So the people actually living with whatever we're trying to implement day to day. And that bucket, they need to understand what's changing, why it's changing, what we're asking them to do, and ideally how it's going to help them. And a really important aspect to keep in mind here is that approval and adoption are two completely different things, right? So I can get approval for a new marketing platform or a strategy, and I can still have it fail because I didn't bring along the people who actually needed to adopt it.
We're definitely an industry of pilots.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
I've done many pilots in my time, and that's like a good example of how um, these gatekeepers and the buckets of these gatekeepers can play out in real time, and it can be very iterative to prove the case of a value of, a platform or a certain service being going portfolio wide.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think technology is a great example here. I may get executive approval for a platform because I've made the business case around cost or efficiencies or how it'll help us make better decisions, but it's not the same pitch that I'm going to make to the people who actually have to use it. You're answering different questions, so I try to tailor my approach depending on which bucket I'm talking to.
So, okay, we're talking about the people. Resistance in marketing is like palpable. It's in our everyday. It's what we can and should expect always in marketing. So the question to really focus on next in resistance to marketing is, what do you do when you have the gatekeepers, but they're resistant to marketing to change? I think the other title that marketers can hold is like full on change management experts. Sarah, can you dig into this a little bit more? Or Kelly, excuse me, Kelly, can you go into this a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what often comes to mind when you think of resistance is that it's negative, and it's fair to think that at first, but this is one of the biggest shifts that I've personally made is how I view resistance. So my first reaction when I would get resistance is, okay, how do I get them on board? But now my first reaction is much more interesting. Okay, why are they pushing back? What can this tell me? Because resistance isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually an opportunity to make the strategy stronger or to understand that person's perspective at a deeper level. There can be true value there when resistance comes up. And actually, Autumn, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I think there's some good
Absolutely.
points on here that I can
Mhm.
elaborate on. Perfect. Um, so when someone says to us, like, I don't want to do this, I don't like this new idea, this new strategy you're implementing, that can mean a lot of different things to us. So maybe they don't understand why we're doing it well enough, or maybe they've tried something similar before and it didn't work. And if that's the case, I certainly want to hear more about that. Or maybe there's an operational challenge that marketing just isn't aware of, and there's that pushback. And sometimes that pushback can help you understand that they're right and that maybe your strategy does need to pivot, or maybe there's an aspect of what you're trying to push forward that needs to change because you're not aware of an operational challenge that it causes for another department or for your on-site team. And one thing that's really important is like I don't immediately go into selling mode. Because if I go into just selling the idea and I'm not receptive to getting that resistance or hearing those questions or that feedback, I may miss the opportunity to learn something. So, when we were talking about the platform previously, I don't typically just go into a site team or to my regionals and say, I need you to buy into this platform or this new marketing tactic. I try to say instead, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the outcome we're trying to create. And this is how we're recommending we get there. And then I stop and I listen and I ask for their perspective. And oftentimes I learn something new, or if at a bare minimum, it enhances that relationship we have with that individual, that department, or that site team.
I think that is so important. And I think you just said something, Kelly. The relationship piece of this is
Mhm.
so critical. I cannot tell you how many times in my own career where a lot of what succeeds is because there is a sense of trust and partnership
Absolutely.
between marketing and our internal stakeholders. And again, that can mean anything from your regional managers, your on-site teams, other corporate departments, whether that's technology or HR or any other um, sort of partner that you're working with internally. I think that trust, the communication aspect of this cannot be the importance of that just is paramount. And I think that's a really key piece of this. It's really hard to create momentum and alignment if people don't know your your sort of perspective and the fact that you're doing
Mhm.
this based on a sense of trust and mutual respect. And so if that's something that if you are in a situation where marketing has historically gotten a bad rap, or you're trying to rebuild from scratch or build from scratch, that's a really important place to focus some time and attention on. I can share earlier in my career, I was new to the company and marketing was a newer function. And the regional managers were highly skeptical that of just sort of the ulterior motive, so to speak, what I was actually going to be spending my time on. And so the relationship building had to happen first. And once there was that trust, it was a whole lot easier to create momentum and really from there, it was sort of a rocket ship of a lot of different things. But I think what you've just described is so important. And I just wanted to reiterate some of or echo some of what you've said, because I know it's certainly rung true for me as well.
Yeah,
The one thing I
absolutely.
Sorry, Kelly, didn't mean to
No,
talk
it's
over
okay.
you. The one thing I think about too with this is how important, like, if anybody's picked up this book and read it, but how important like radical candor is with
Mm.
this. Like, I think we're talking about a space where, like, there's gatekeepers and there's like resistance, but I almost get a sense too of like, then we overcome those. But like, what if you can't overcome it with a certain gatekeeper? Like, what can you do as the marketing leader to try and like push through that very resistant gatekeeper, the absolute barrier? Maybe there's like PTSD from like a failed pilot 6 or 12 months previous. How do you navigate those? Just like it's like resistance to a barrier.
I mean,
I
for
think,
me, oh, sorry,
please.
go ahead. Okay.
Nope.
I was gonna say for me, I think it's I need to find out why. Like I need to understand why they are so steadfast in resisting, and not come about it in a defensive way. I need
Yeah.
to come at it in a collaborative way where I'm open-minded to hearing what their feedback is. Like I know one example that came to mind as you were talking, Autumn, was that recently our marketing team changed our nudge strategy on our websites. And we had plenty of reasoning and rationale for the change. We communicated it really well, and there was some pushback from our regionals.
Mm,
And their pushback, their concern was that it would negatively impact lease velocity. And so I, asked some other questions to better understand their resistance and why they were so worried. And then I addressed it head on. And at the very end of it, I said, you have to remember we would never do something to negatively impact lease velocity. We're on the same team. We have the same goals here. We are always working to help you and support you and your property needs. And this is one way that we're going to do that. And I think once that reframe happened and there was that friendly reminder of, hey, we're in this together and we're looking for the same outcome, that certainly helped pull back that resistance. And the next email I got was, great, thank you for explaining. This makes sense now. I look forward to seeing how this rolls out. And then
yeah.
that was the end of it. So I think for me in that moment, I just needed to better understand why they were so steadfast on saying no. They immediately closed the door and said, nope, this cannot happen. And that was the whole email. But I took
Mhm.
the time to kind of dig into it more with them and try to understand it so I could address it head on. Sarah,
Yep.
sorry to cut you off. I think you were going to say something too.
All I wanted to add to what you said, Kelly, and to put sort of another layer of context on this question, Autumn, is the question of, how do you think about beyond asking the question of, why and why are you, let's talk about this. And again, the partnership, collaboration, and trust piece here is so critical, is understanding, Kelly spoke to these buckets of approval, influence, and adoption earlier. I think understanding where the person sits,
Mm, mhm,
that, sort of understanding their perspective, not just on the, okay, well, why are we doing this and what is the blocker, but understanding, is this person an approver, an influencer, or someone who's actually going to be adopting whatever it is that you're proposing? That helps with the sort of uh, set of questions that you might ask. Again, it's
mhm.
catered. It feels a little like PR, and it's not meant to be like a spin doctor thing at all. It's really understanding the heart of what is on this person's mind, so that you can then cater your response just as you described, Kelly, to say, okay, yeah, let's talk about this. Regional managers are concerned about lease velocity. Let's address that head on. And really understanding that um, will help you figure out the path forward. So I think there's
Mhm.
very much a opposite. You cannot be a bull in a china shop and get things done. That is the antithesis of productivity. Even though it might feel like, the only way forward is to put your head down and run, it is not sustainable, and you will make some you will do yourself and your team a disservice if you just try to charge ahead. It's much more productive, even though it may feel like you're taking a step back. Sometimes you have to be able to do that to move forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you just said that, Sarah, because sometimes when I get pushback or resistance and I am trying to put out a million fires at the same time, and it's the last thing I need to hear, I sometimes remind myself just to pause
Mhm.
and respond to it and work through it with that individual because I've already received the approval. I've made the decision as the marketing leader. It's happening. So I could just charge through and just say, sorry, this is what we're doing. This is how we're pivoting. But instead, I stop and I take the time to build that partnership and focus on the relationship and bring them along with the pivot and strategy because it will have a greater chance of being successful in the long term if I stop and bring them along for the whole change and not just charge ahead because it's the quickest path forward.
Yeah, completely. And that is a great segue to what just appeared here on the slide.
Yeah.
Um, so, a couple minutes ago, we talked about marketers being masters of change management. And I think a big piece of that is getting to the so what. One of my more recent in-house roles was very change management focused. And we actually brought in a consultant who I partnered very closely with, as in my role as Senior Vice President of Marketing, where we did a lot of change management communication. And one of the things we talked about was this idea of, in any communication that goes out the door to any stakeholder, The idea was, what do we want people to think? What do we want them to feel? And what do we want them to do? You can't sort of just push a email out the door or a Teams message or whatever it is without those three things if you actually want to architect some change. And so that forever has changed how I think about internal comms and change management specifically. And I think there have been elements of this certainly in lots of different communications that we've all sent out, right? But I think the idea of having this very concise framework to be able to measure against, and Kelly, you sort of hinted at this a couple of minutes ago when you said what questions might come up as you're crafting an internal communication, what questions might come up and how do you address those? This is another way to do that, to say, what do you want them to think? What do you want people to feel? And what do you need them to do? And that gives people a really clear vision of what it is that you are trying to architect in terms of change, but it also helps them feel like they are part of the process and that they have a very clear sense of what is happening, why is it happening, when is it happening, and what do they need to do as part of the strategic initiative that is happening. And I will tell you also, there is no such thing as over communicating. You may feel like you're saying the same thing until you are literally blue in the face. I promise you, you could say it again and someone would say, I had no idea this was happening. So it
So
is
true.
just everyone is so busy, and no one is paying as much attention to the initiatives that we are putting out as we are, because again, we are in the driver's seat and we're really trying to architect that change. So there is always more room to communicate. There is always more room to think about again how we really distill a message down to the so what and really make something a whole lot more effective when it lands in somebody's inbox by following this framework.
All right, let's push forward. So, we're gonna wrap some of this up together, guys. We'll have the recording available. We'll send it out to everyone. But more importantly, we're gonna expand on some of these pieces and send it out to you. So if that is a single nugget that you take away and you implement tomorrow, or something that you think about a little bit differently, or let's say you're new to your role, or you want to start from scratch, or you want to overhaul how you start to do internal marketing or market your marketing. We hope that this is just like a piece that stays on your desk, a reference material that helps you at least a little bit, if not a whole lot. We're near the end too. I'm also like big fan of Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec, so I love her. And hopefully you guys are inspired by yourselves too, right? Like Sarah was saying, it feels like you're tooting your own horn. And honestly, you guys should toot your own horn. Everybody should talk about the activities that they're doing, the outcomes that they are having, both independently in their roles and the departments that they're leading. That's really important. So let's bring some questions to it. We have one question from Michelle. Um, she said, uh, how do you really pilot when it typically means a big lift for several people and departments, or in the sense of websites, you don't just pilot a new website? I have a very particular answer for this because of like Resi, but I want to turn it over to you, Sarah and Kelly. Tell me what your opinion is on this.
So I would say if you are talking about something that is a website, to use the example, I think that can be something that, depending on how large it is, you actually can pilot a website. I think if there's a compelling reason to change providers, maybe it is a new acquisition and you've been thinking about making a change for website providers anyway. An acquisition could be a great opportunity to do that. A lease up could also be a great opportunity to do that. And it could be positioned to the other stakeholders in the company as we are looking to change providers for specific reasons rather than creating new workflows for an existing team. We think it'll be a whole lot smoother to take a team that is not yet set up and do this exercise, and if it goes well, then we could potentially phase other properties over time. So I think if you are talking about specifically, again, a website, I think there are ways to make it a more bite-sized exercise and not make it something that feels like you are trying to change 100 properties over tomorrow. There are always ways to do things in phases, and again, those natural sort of entries into the portfolio, whether through acquisition or lease up or a change in management or whatever that may be. Sometimes in my prior life, we did a lot of third party management. We had clients request new providers that we were not yet working with. And so we were um, required to adapt in some cases. And those new partnerships actually opened up the door to much bigger collaborations where we ended up moving, a good chunk of the portfolio over to something because a client asked for it. So I think there are ways to make things a test or a pilot. And if you need to loop in other stakeholders, I think there's a way to do that in a thoughtful way as well. Again, I would say, what I mentioned earlier about you can't just put your head down and push through it. I think that the trust and the partnership, if you need IT to be on board, with the example of the website, figuring out what their bandwidth is to support something like that is also incredibly important. And it may mean that you have to push pause on something, if it's that type of exercise. So, Kelly, that would be my take. What would you say?
I completely agree. I think the other thing that came to mind initially is that I would probably go by and have in-person conversations, even if casually, to plant the seed with those different departments and get a better sense of what does that big lift mean for them. That way, when I do make the recommendation to pilot the website, I would say, okay, this is what it's going to take from the IT side. This is what it's going to take from XYZ department. And I would lay it all out clearly instead of just sending an email saying, we're piloting a new website. Because I think then that panic can happen. People immediately get defensive. They say, nope, this can't happen. We have too many other priorities on our plate. But if you can kind of get ahead of it, have those little moments of conversation, and then send out a communication with everyone involved, clearly outlining what the lift is for each group and what the timeline that you're proposing is, I think you can start off in a stronger sense. It's not to say you're not going to get resistance or pushback. You still might, but at least you're giving it the best starting point possible.
Yeah, I think, I can't think of a single implementation I ever did that wasn't, I didn't have to have multiple people or departments involved, sometimes even
Hmm.
in the smallest thing. Um, and just from like Resi's point of view, right, guys, because this is our bread and butter, this is what we do every day. We have clients do pilots all the time. And it's a really great way to do one of two things, right? There's a potential reason for change. So it allows you to experience a different platform, a different partnership and relationship, or it further validates some of the other partnerships that you already have. Um, and we have, like, for example, like a pilot program because we really understand like the lift of moving a website. I liken it to like some of the two hardest ones are like CRMs, and I was never like involved in accounting software, but like CRMs and websites are like the biggies. And we try and make that as easy as humanly possible because we don't want it to be a headache when it should be a really exciting experience. What other questions do we have? We had a few questions actually pour in. I don't see any in the chat right now, um, unless I'm missing any, and I don't think I am. We had a few pour in, like from our emails or just like chatting our team. And someone said they feel really stuck in their role right now. None of their marketing is landing, and they feel ignored. Where should they start to really turn it around?
I
Uh,
would go back to
uh,
the listening tour
mhm.
concept, and think about where you do feel stuck. And I would be really open and say, I feel like things are not landing. And I would love your feedback on that. And what do you feel like? And again, you're in the spirit of building alliances. I think there's nothing wrong with asking for feedback, whether you have been in a role for a week or a decade. I think companies always change. That's if there's one thing that's constant for all of us, it's change. And that means that we need to change too. And so I think asking for feedback and um, really being open to that feedback would be my advice for that stuck marketer.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that that I would certainly try to figure out where the disconnect actually is. With the title of this is marketing your marketing. I certainly wouldn't start by marketing harder. I would, figure out like why it isn't landing. And it could be that like leadership isn't seeing the business value, or it could be that you're solving problems that the organization doesn't perceive as priorities, even though it feels like a priority to you. And then I would probably pick one or two opportunities where marketing can very clearly connect its work to a business problem and start building credibility there. You don't have to change your organization's perception of marketing overnight. It truly takes time. But if you can just start with one or two opportunities that you know ties directly back to a business problem or a huge opportunity that's trying to be solved, it's a great way to start building that credibility.
That
Yeah,
is
that's
such
it.
a, go ahead. Go ahead, Sarah.
All I wanted to say was marketing does not operate in a silo. So I'm so glad that you just highlighted that, Kelly, because you're right. If we're not solving problems that are meaningful to the business, then that is probably a likely cause of disconnect.
I think that's such a good segue, and we're towards the end of our hour. Thank you, everyone, for spending maybe it was your lunch hour or we're on your second screen while you put out fires on your other screen. We appreciate being a part of your day today. But Kelly, as you were just talking, is making the business case when we were talking about this, a part of like in the off the record conversation, and then also preparing for this, we're like, there's an entirely different like theme that to visit, and that's like bridging ROI to NOI and how we can speak those different audiences' languages so we can level up to that and get better adoption, approval, and influence rates. And so next week we'll be right back here. Sarah and I will be right back here with other Sarah from Princeton Properties. So please join us. It'll be a little bit more finance and data focused, which we're really excited about. Do not hesitate. I know for me, if you have any questions, please like find me on LinkedIn or if you know my email, don't hesitate to reach out. And any questions, bits of knowledge that Sarah and Kelly can provide to you as well, please don't hesitate to reach out. Any parting words, Sarah or Kelly?
My parting words would be just prioritize as much as you can. I understand the comments about putting out fires. I certainly go through that all the time. But similar to me understanding the priorities of the business, I need to understand the priorities of being a marketing leader and running a successful department. And that means carving out the time and forcing the time for marketing your marketing. It truly is an underpin to your success.
Agreed. And I would say if you aren't telling your story, then someone else will.
Mm.
So finding that time, as Kelly said, is critical to your success as a marketing leader.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, everyone. We'll get this prepared and sent out. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.